Hello, my dear masterminds. They really thought they had you where they wanted you, didn't they? Cute. They thought you'd forgotten how much power you actually carry. They read your silence as surrender. They mistook your distance for weakness. They saw you standing still and convinced themselves you were stuck. They started talking a little louder, moving a little bolder, making little moves behind your back. Like the game was already decided, they forgot one minor detail. You are not someone life can play with and walk away untouched. You are not some extra in their storyline. You are the plot twist. You are the correction. You are the part of the story that humbles every person who thinks they're untouchable. They thought the upper hand meant control. It didn't. It just meant they were closer to the lesson, while they were busy counting their advantage. You were counting something else entirely. Every time you stayed quiet instead of snapping, every time you held back instead of exposing them, every time you chose growth over reaction, they thought you were soft. You were just focused. They thought you were scared. You were just strategic. They thought you were finished. You were just reloading. And the universe saw all of it. Every disrespect, every side comment, every fake smile, every little move they made thinking you wouldn't notice or wouldn't respond. You noticed. You just chose not to waste your energy on reminders. Until now, because there always comes a moment where life says, okay, that's enough. Time to remind them. Not with shouting, not with drama, not with petty little clapbacks, but with presence, with results. With the kind of shift that makes every person who played with you suddenly remember exactly who they're dealing with. That's where you are now. This is the chapter where you stop dimming yourself so other people don't feel small. This is the moment where your energy straightens up. Your eyes get clear. Your spirit steps forward and says, let's fix the confusion. You're not here to beg for respect. You're here to embody it. You're not here to explain your worth. You're here to live it in a way that makes arguments pointless. They thought they had the upper hand because they were loud, because they were many, because they were early. But they forgot something legends never forget. The game doesn't end when they feel comfortable. It ends when you decide you're done holding back. And you're done. Not emotional, not desperate, just done. Time to refresh some memories. Funny thing about people who think they're winning, most of them never really learned the rules. They think volume equals dominance. They think attention equals power. They think confidence comes from being on top of someone else. They don't understand real strength. Real strength is silent until spoken to. Real strength carries itself without needing applause. Real strength doesn't beg to be seen. It walks into a room and shifts the temperature. That's you. You don't perform power. You are power. And they forgot that. They forgot who built the foundation they're standing on. They forgot who survived what they couldn't handle for 10 seconds. They forgot who kept moving when the world threw storms at your door. They forgot who they were dealing with. And that's the funniest part. Because you never changed. You just stopped showing your cards. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped giving them the blueprint. You stopped letting them study your next move like it was a public broadcast. That silence, that distance, that focus. It wasn't a retreat, it was evolution. It was the calm before the reveal. And now the reveal has arrived. And they're not ready. You can see it in their eyes. You can hear it in their tone. You can feel it in the way they've suddenly become careful, quiet, calculating. They're realizing they misread the entire situation. They thought this was over. They thought you were pinned down. They thought your story was wrapped. And now, just by existing in your full power, you've reminded them the story is yours. The pace is yours. The outcome is yours. They don't get to define your rise. They don't get to hold the pen. They don't get to narrate your value. They can only sit there, watching. As every assumption they made crumbles on command, because legends don't owe explanations. Legends don't ask permission. Legends don't wait for approval. Legends move, and history adjusts. That's what's happening. Right now, in real time, the shift they prayed would never come is here. And all their noise, all their upper hand talk, it's collapsing under the weight of a simple truth. You never stopped being who you are. You just let them forget. And now you're reminding them, without raising your voice, without losing your center, without asking for anything. You're just standing in your truth. And suddenly, the whole game is different. And here's the part that stings them the most. You didn't have to dismantle them to expose them. You didn't have to clap back, go loud, or start a conflict. All you did was stand back up. And that alone shook everything they built on your name. Because deep down, they always knew the truth. Your downfall was never real. It was just a pause, a breath, a silent chapter in a story they never had the right to narrate. They thought silence meant defeat, but silence was your loading screen. They thought your absence meant you were finished, but you were studying the map while they were celebrating too early. They thought the upper hand meant control, but control, real control, is internal. It's in your patience. It's in your focus. It's in your refusal to break character while the world tries to provoke you. You didn't break. You didn't crack. You didn't fold. You recalibrated. And now, look at them. Watching you like you're a plot twist they didn't see coming. Trying to track your moves like a mystery they can't decode. Asking quiet questions they're afraid to say out loud. How did they bounce back? How are they still rising? How did they level up without us noticing? They thought the game was over, but you weren't even warmed up. They thought you were done, but you were just done playing small. You're not returning to the field, you're changing it. You're not fighting for a place, you're building one. You're not proving who you are. You're reminding them who you've always been. And that's the part that scares them. Not that you came back, but that you came back different, sharper, calmer, unbothered, unreachable. A version of you that no longer reacts, only moves. There was never a moment where you lost your power. They just mistook your grace for weakness. And now you're here to correct the record. They thought they could write your ending. They thought they could freeze your momentum. They thought they could drag your story into a corner where no one would remember your name. They really believed their opinions could weaken your reality. But here's what they never understood. You weren't waiting for their validation. You were sharpening your edge in silence. While they were busy performing confidence, you were building it. While they were running their mouths, you were running your mission. They mistook your stillness for surrender, your patience for weakness, your distance for defeat. But that's what happens when small minds try to measure a limitless soul. They thought they had the upper hand because they saw you pause, They thought their voice was the loudest in the room because you didn't waste breath arguing. They thought they could set the tone of your future just because they spoke first. But you were never on their timeline. You were never under their control. You were never playing their game. You were rewriting the whole rule book while they were still reading the instructions. And now the shift is undeniable. Their confidence is cracking. Their narrative is collapsing. They're replaying every time they doubted you and choking on every sentence they spoke too boldly. You didn't remind them who you are with noise. You reminded them with results, with growth, with evolution, with presence. You became the proof they never thought they'd see. And now the room feels different. The air feels different. The balance has flipped. They don't hold the upper hand anymore because they never truly did. They just assumed silence meant defeat instead of intelligence. They thought they had you contained, controlled, categorized. They thought they knew your limits because they only ever measured you with their own. They never realized some people don't grow in public. Some people evolve in silence. Some people sharpen every fracture into an edge. They kept waiting for you to fold, kept watching for you to slip, kept betting on your burnout like it was guaranteed. But every time they thought they'd seen the end of you, all they were really seeing was a version you'd already outgrown. You didn't come back to prove them wrong. You came back because you were always meant to rise higher than their imagination. And that's what terrifies them now. They believed they were the gatekeepers, the judges, the ones with authority over your fate. They thought your worth could be decided with a sentence, a rumor, a moment of doubt spoken into the wrong ears. But the moment you stepped back into your power, everything changed. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't campaign for respect. You simply stood in your truth. And suddenly their entire script fell apart. Because it's hard to control someone who no longer fears being misunderstood. It's hard to intimidate someone who already survived their worst night. It's impossible to break someone who already rebuilt themselves from dust. Now they feel it. The shift, the reversal, the truth hitting them like an echo they can't outrun. You never needed validation. They did. You never needed permission. They did. You never needed their seat at the table. You were building your own hall all along, and now they see it. Too late to stop it. Too late to rewrite it. Too late to pretend they never doubted you. They thought they had the upper hand, but the only thing they were holding was a story that no longer applies to the person you've become. And here's the part that really stings them. You never needed revenge. You never needed to expose them, embarrass them, or drag them into the light. You just kept moving. You kept evolving. You kept becoming everything they said you couldn't. And that's what dismantled their confidence. Because deep down, they were never rooting for your failure. They were counting on it. Your silence became their paranoia. Your growth became their collapse. Every step you took forward felt like a personal attack on their ego, even though you weren't thinking about them at all. They replayed every moment they doubted you, every time they smirked, every time they whispered. They thought you were fragile. They thought you were done. They thought the story was over. But they forgot something powerful. The person who survives the fall doesn't fear the climb. And the person who builds themselves in the dark isn't worried about who's watching when the spotlight hits. Now it's happening. That shift, that undeniable truth, that moment where your existence becomes proof. Proof that they were wrong. Proof that you were chosen. proof that the fire they tried to drown only refined you hotter. And now they flinch at your name. They second guess every move. They analyze every breath. Because deep down, they know the same person they tried to limit is now the one rewriting the limits. You didn't return to take what's theirs. You returned to claim what was always yours. And the moment they realized that, the upper hand slipped, the illusion shattered, their power faded. Because truth doesn't need permission, and destiny doesn't wait for applause. You reminded them, not with noise, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with evolution, with presence, with undeniable gravity. You didn't rise to prove yourself. You rose to become yourself. And nothing is more terrifying than a person who finally remembers their own power. And now look at them. The same ones who talked like they were untouchable. The same ones who acted like they owned the ground you walked on. Suddenly quiet. Suddenly unsure. Suddenly studying you like a mystery they can't solve. Because something clicked. Not in their favor, but in yours. They thought intimidation was power. They thought control was strength. But you never needed either. All you needed was time. Time to grow. Time to learn. Time to sharpen the edge they swore would never cut. And when your moment came, you didn't scream. You didn't warn them. You didn't announce your rise like a parade. You simply stepped into alignment, and the world shifted. The energy bent. The air changed. People could feel you before they saw you. That's what happens when someone remembers who they really are. You become undeniable. You become unforgettable. You become the storm they can't prepare for. Because you don't move with rage. You move with purpose. And that scares them more. They kept checking for weakness, expecting wounds, searching for the old version of you. But they can't find what no longer exists. You outgrew their version of you. You upgraded your entire frequency. They can't talk over you anymore. They can't define you anymore. They can't trap you in their old narrative. You broke the frame. You rewrote the label. You shattered the ceiling and forged your own sky. And now, they're the ones who look small. They're the ones who look confused. They're the ones who look powerless. Because power was never about who controlled the room. It was about who no longer needed validation to stay in it. You became the reminder, the wake-up call, the shift, the proof that everything they said was final, was just the beginning. And now, every time they see you, it hits them again. They were wrong. Not because you said it, but because you became it. Here's the part that really stings them. You never needed revenge. You never needed to expose them. You never needed to clap back, call them out, or prove your worth through noise. You let life reveal the truth for you. That's a different kind of power, the kind they can't touch, the kind they can't argue with, the kind that makes them replay every moment they underestimated you, every time they doubted you, every word they spoke like it was fact, and now they can't escape it. Your rise is loud in their memory and silent in your effort. You didn't break their expectations. You dissolved them. You shifted the room just by existing in your truth. That's why they stare now. That's why they whisper now. That's why their confidence folds when you walk in. Because they remember the version of you they laughed at. But now they're looking at the version of you they can't outrun, the version they can't control, the version they were never ready for. You became a living correction, a walking rewrite, a human reminder that people don't stay small, just because they're spoken to that way. You learned the game, then chose to play it your way. Not louder, smarter, not faster, deeper, not seeking attention, commanding respect. And that's the part that stays with them. You rose without bending, you succeeded without begging, you evolved without asking for permission. Now every time your name comes up, the tone changes, the room shifts, the energy adjusts. You're not a rumor anymore. You're not a question mark. You're a fact, a force, a presence. And they felt it the moment you stopped trying to prove something and simply became it. They thought they had the upper hand, but you were never reaching for it. You were building your own. Now they're stuck remembering exactly who you are, while you move forward, becoming even more. And the quiet truth, they'll never admit out loud. They always knew you had it in you. That's why they tried to hold you back early. That's why they spoke doubt like prophecy. That's why they pushed, questioned, minimized, twisted, and tested you. It was never about who you were. It was about who they sensed you might become. They weren't resisting the present version of you. They were afraid of the future one. The one standing here now. The one with clarity instead of confusion. Fire instead of fear. Direction instead of doubt. You didn't just rise. You rose in a way that exposed everything they hoped was true about you. As a lie, you became undeniable. And once a person becomes undeniable, the world has to react. Even the ones who swore they'd never give you respect now speak your name with caution. Even the ones who hoped you'd disappear now watch you like you're the weather. Even the ones who tried to define you now realize you define yourself. That's the moment everything flips. Not when you win, but when they know you can't lose. When they finally understand you don't crack under pressure. You get sharper. You don't fall apart. You upgrade. You don't chase validation. It starts orbiting you. You didn't need to win publicly. You didn't need to shout your story. You didn't need to beg for a seat. You built your own table, lit your own path, and turned every doubt into fuel. Now their memory is your trophy. Their silence is your applause. Their shock is your proof. And while they're stuck replaying every moment they counted you out, you're already writing the next chapter. Bigger, bolder, untouchable. They thought they had the upper hand, but you were the whole game. And now they remember. They finally remember exactly who you are. Hello, my dear masterminds. They thought you were finished, wrapped up, cornered, decisively turned. They whispered to each other like it was done, like the story had already closed on you, like you were just a footnote in a chapter they wrote too early. They looked at your silence and mistook it for defeat. But silence is never weakness. Silence is never surrender. Silence is what happens when a storm gathers its power before it breaks. You were not out of moves. You were out of patience. You were done explaining yourself to people still busy underestimating you. They thought you were quiet because you were empty. But that silence, that was strategy. That was composure. That was mastery. A king does not announce every move. A legend does not broadcast every calculation. A rising force does not need applause to exist. You were silent because you were already past the point of needing validation. You were silent because you knew the truth. A lion does not roar while stalking the win. You planned in silence, you grew in silence, you healed in silence, you evolved in silence, and in silence you won. They kept checking for signs that you were collapsing, waiting for any hint of weakness, hoping for proof that they were right about you. But the truth was harsher than they expected. There was nothing to see because everything was happening above their understanding. You were not losing. You were leveling. You were not stuck. You were becoming. And now they stand there, confused, shocked, nervous, because it hits them. The silence meant a decisive turn. The silence meant you are built different. The silence meant something they never anticipated. You were already beyond the finish line, while they were still celebrating the starting shot. Now they scramble, digging for explanations, ignoring every warning sign they once laughed at. They realized the shift was not when you spoke. The shift was when you stopped. Because the quiet ones, the ones who say nothing, they are the ones who already see everything. You did not need to clap back. You did not need to argue. You did not need to prove anything. You let time do the talking, and time just exposed the truth. Every doubt they projected faded. Every bet against you faded. Every whisper they spread turned into their own echo. You did not need to win loudly. You just needed to win undeniably. And now here they are, looking at you like they misread every chapter. Because they did. They read your silence as weakness, not knowing it was the final move in a scenario they never learned to play. They do not say it out loud, but you can feel it in the way they look at you now. That confusion, that unease, that sudden awareness that they miscalculated the entire time. They thought silence meant you were shrinking. They did not realize it meant you were sharpening. Silence is where the real ones rebuild, where the real ones reset, where the real ones reload. While they were busy writing you off, you were busy rewriting your entire path. And now they are replaying every moment where they thought they had the early advantage. Every moment they thought you were stuck. Every moment they convinced themselves they broke you. It hits them in waves. They did not corner you. They exposed themselves. They did not outsmart you. They revealed their assumptions. They did not defeat you. They awakened you. Because when someone like you goes silent, it means the internal shift already happened. The kind of shift that cannot be reversed. The kind of shift that unsettles people who never expected you to rise again. They were not prepared for the version of you that came out of the quiet. This version is not waiting for approval. This version does not hesitate. This version does not need to be understood. This version is surgical, calculated, certain. They thought they knew you, based on who you were before the silence. But silence changes people. Silence rewires the spirit. Silence strips away illusions. Silence rebuilds power. And the moment you walked out of that quiet, everything about your energy shifted. They cannot explain it. They cannot articulate it. But they feel it. A tension in the air when you enter the room. A pressure behind their ribs when they think of you. A sudden caution in their voice when your name comes up. They do not know what you are capable of now, and that unsettles them. Because people do not fear noise. People fear unpredictability. The unknown, the quiet force that watches, learns, adapts, and moves when the timing is perfect. And that is exactly what you became. A force they never prepared for. A presence they never saw coming. A reminder that not every victory is played out loud. Some victories are earned in the shadows, long before the world notices. And now they are noticing. Too late. They are trying to piece together how you flipped the entire script without giving a single warning. They want to know when you got this strong, when you got this clear, when you became unstoppable. But the truth is simple. You were already winning in silence, while they were celebrating your downfall out loud. They mistook the pause for an ending. They mistook the stillness for surrender. They mistook your silence for defeat. They were wrong. Silence was not the end. It was the evolution. They keep replaying it in their heads. That moment when everything shifted and they could not even catch it happening. One day you were silent. The next day your presence felt heavier, sharper, more focused. They did not see the internal upgrades. They did not witness the late-night battles you fought alone. They did not stand in the quiet with you while you rebuilt your spirit piece by piece. But now they are dealing with the version of you that rose out of all that. And it is a version they are not equipped to handle. They thought you were predictable. They thought you were easy to read. They thought they had you mapped, labeled, placed neatly into their little narrative. But silence makes people realize how little they truly understood. Your silence rewrote the entire blueprint they had of you. It forced them to acknowledge what they should have recognized from the start. A quiet person who knows their own power. A quiet person who stopped explaining themselves. A quiet person who outgrew the need to prove anything. They do not fear your voice. They fear your restraint. They fear your calm. They fear the way you can sit still while chaos erupts around you, because your power is not reaction, it is awareness. You see more in silence than they ever see in noise. And that is what disarmed them. They were loud. You were focused. They were frantic. You were grounded. They were celebrating too early. You were preparing for the long path. They thought the silence meant you had nothing left. But the truth, you were watching patterns form. You were catching lies in their tone. You were studying intentions hidden between their words. You were observing the moves they did not realize they were making. And every time they underestimated you, they handed you another piece of the puzzle. And now the picture is clear. So clear that your silence alone feels like authority. It feels like you know something they do not. It feels like you are 5 steps ahead, even when you have not said a word. And they dislike that. They dislike that they cannot read you anymore. They dislike that their old tricks do not work. They dislike that they do not know which version of you they are dealing with now. But the truth is simple. They are dealing with the version of you that stopped needing validation. The version that does not fold under pressure. The version that is not moved by their opinions. The version that has nothing to prove, yet proves everything by existing. They are finally realizing the most powerful advantage you ever had was not strength or anger or boldness. It was silence. Silence that held lessons. Silence that held strategy. Silence that held transformation. Silence that held a future they never imagined you would reach. And now that you have stepped back into the world, calm and steady, with that quiet confidence in your chest, they are scrambling to understand how they lost control of the story. They do not get it yet, but they are starting to. You did not win because you pushed louder. You won because you moved smarter. You won because you evolved when they expected you to crack. You won because your silence was not empty. It was the birthplace of your next victory. They still do not understand what really happened. They think the shift was sudden, but it was not sudden at all. It was earned. It was built. It was engineered quietly, slowly, intentionally. While they were busy trying to measure your worth by the noise you did not make, you were building leverage they could not see. You were collecting truths they overlooked. You were mastering patience they did not respect. And every time they convinced themselves you were done, you were actually sharpening a part of yourself they could never keep up with. That is why your silence unsettled them so deeply. Because silence reveals absence and presence at the same time. Absence of reaction, presence of awareness, absence of weakness, presence of strength, absence of fear, presence of focus. They do not fear losing control of you. They fear losing control of the illusion they built around you. Because that illusion made their lives easier. That illusion made them comfortable. That illusion made them feel superior. But now they are forced to accept that the version of you they crafted in their heads was not real. The version of you they underestimated was not real. The version of you they tried to manipulate was not real. The real you was growing in the quiet, and that is what unsettles them. Because real power grows where nobody is watching. Real transformation does not need applause. Real evolution does not ask for permission. They thought you were inactive, but you were incubating. They thought you were isolated, but you were elevating. They thought you had no options, but you were creating ones they could not imagine. And now reality is hitting them harder than any words ever could. They are replaying the moments where they laughed, where they doubted, where they treated you like a story that had already ended. Now they are realizing your silence was not resignation, it was regeneration. It was you stepping back into your own frequency. It was you choosing your battles with a precision they do not possess. It was you mastering emotional distance while they mistook it for defeat. And now they are studying everything you do, trying to decode the shift. They do not understand that the shift was not sudden. It was structural. You rebuilt your identity from the root. You refined your strength from the ashes. You upgraded your perspective from the pain. You stepped out of the old you so completely that even you barely recognize who you used to be. And here is the truth. They cannot process. Once someone evolves past a certain point, they cannot be pulled back into old versions of themselves, no matter who tries. Not friends, not rivals, not family, not fear. Your silence became a boundary. Your silence became a filter. Your silence became the line that separated who you were from who you became. And now when they look at you, they do not see a person they can predict anymore. They see a person who endured storms they never knew existed. They see a person who transformed challenge into precision. They see a person who does not respond emotionally, only strategically. And that is why they are nervous. Because deep down they know, the moment you stopped explaining yourself, you became untouchable. What is funny is how they suddenly respect your silence. Now when before they mocked it, before they called it weakness, now they call it mysterious. Before they said you were quiet because you had nothing to say. Now they say you are quiet because you know too much. Before, they thought silence meant you were confused. Now they are concerned silence means you are calculating. That is the power shift they did not see coming. Because silence does not change you. It exposes them. It exposes who panics when you stop giving reactions. It exposes who loses stability when you pull your energy back. It exposes who depended on your openness to feel in control. And now that they do not have access to your thoughts, your plans, your emotions, your next move, they are spiraling. They are questioning everything. They replay conversations wondering what they missed. They read your expressions like they are studying a foreign language. They watch your presence like it is a warning, and that is because your silence did not freeze the scenario. It advanced you to the stage they did not prepare for. You outgrew their version of the story. You outgrew their expectations. You outgrew their influence. And now they are dealing with the version of you that is not fueled by validation, but by clarity. A version that does not operate emotionally, only intentionally. A version that does not react impulsively, only purposefully. A version that stopped trying to fix connections that crack under pressure. You learn that some people only understand your silence when it benefits them. And some people only understand your absence when it affects them. You stopped giving them the privilege of easy access. That is why your presence feels heavier than your words ever did. That is why your calm feels louder than anyone else's reaction. That is why your stillness feels like a storm waiting to unfold. You do not need to defend yourself anymore. Your evolution defends you. You do not need to remind them who you are. Your consistency reminds them. You do not need to prove your growth. Your results prove you. And the best part, they cannot undo the moment they realize they misjudged you. They cannot unsee your strength. They cannot unhear the truth in your silence. They cannot unfeel the shift in your energy. It is too late for them to rewrite what has already unfolded. You stood tall when they thought you would crack. You healed from wounds they assumed would hold you down. You outlasted storms they believed would overwhelm you, and your silence transformed into the reminder they never expected. You were not out of moves, you were out of patience. And once your patience ran out, your power stepped in. That is why they are cautious now. That is why they are hesitant. That is why they are watching their words around you. Because deep down, they know your silence is not the absence of strength. It is the presence of mastery. You know what truly shook them. Not just the silence, but the shift that came with it. Because when most people go quiet, they shrink, they disappear, they retreat. But when you went quiet, you expanded. Your focus sharpened, your presence grew, your aura shifted in a way they could not understand. They expected silence to be your ending, but it became your reset button. It became the moment everything aligned internally. It became the doorway to a version of you that does not crack, does not beg, does not chase, does not fold. And they felt it before they saw it. They felt the way your energy stopped bending for people who never bent for you. They felt the way your patience stopped cushioning their disrespect. They felt the way your absence suddenly weighed more than your presence ever did. That is why they are uneasy now. Because your silence was not passive, it was preparation. They thought you stepped back because you were unsure, but you stepped back because you were done playing small. You stepped back because you finally understood your worth without needing anyone to validate it. You stepped back because you realized connections built on convenience shift the moment you stop being convenient. And once you stopped showing up for people who never truly showed up for you, their true colors appeared instantly. That is what silence does. It exposes loyalty. It exposes intentions. It exposes value. and your silence revealed everything. The ones who cared stayed, the ones who did not remove themselves. And now that you have returned, standing taller, stronger, calmer, clearer, they are trying to read you like their old script still applies. But every chapter of you has changed. Your priorities shifted, your boundaries strengthened, your intuition sharpened, even your kindness upgraded. It is not the soft, naive kindness they once took for granted. It is the kind of kindness that sees everything and responds only to what is genuine. That is what unsettles them. Because the version of you that used to over-explain is gone. The version of you that used to fix everything is gone. The version of you that used to tolerate disrespect in the name of peace is gone. Silence set those versions aside. Growth elevated a new one. And now they are scrambling because they cannot predict your next move anymore. They cannot influence your emotions. They cannot distract you with old triggers. They cannot pressure you into shrinking. They cannot guilt you into ignoring your intuition. You are not guided by fear anymore. You are not guided by approval anymore. You are not guided by old cycles anymore. You are guided by awareness, discipline, truth, and that combination makes you unstoppable. That is why your silence was not weakness. It was the moment you became untouchable. They just realized it too late. Hello, my dear warriors. They told you you'd never be anything. Remember how easily those words came out of their mouths, like it was a fact written in stone, like they were reading your future off a script someone else wrote. They spoke with confidence they didn't earn, authority they didn't deserve. They looked at you and saw limits, not potential. They saw smallness, not becoming. They thought they knew your story because they saw your starting point. But they never imagined how far you'd travel without their permission. Those words weren't predictions. They were projections. Their voice wasn't prophecy. It was insecurity in disguise. They needed you to fail so they could feel safe staying exactly where they were. They needed you to stay small so their comfort wouldn't look like weakness. They needed your silence to prove their voice mattered. But you didn't give them what they wanted. You didn't fall apart. You didn't fall apart. You didn't swallow their doubt and call it truth. You took those words, those cheap, careless words, and you carried them like iron in your chest. You turned them into fuel, into inner power, into force, into a reason. Every time they doubted you, something in you sharpened. Every time they laughed, something in you solidified. Every time they dismissed you, something in you rose. Quietly, steadily, relentlessly. They thought nothing was happening, but everything was happening. Growth is invisible until it isn't. Transformation is silent until it speaks. Power is slow until it arrives all at once. And now, you're impossible. The thing they swore could never happen is standing in front of them like a mirror they can't avoid, a mirror that reflects everything they got wrong, every limit they tried to place on you, every story they tried to write in your name. Your impossible became their proof, their reality check, their lesson. They spent years assuming the world was built the way they understood it. But you didn't follow the map. You erased it. You didn't wait for permission. You outgrew the system. You didn't ask to be accepted. You became undeniable. Now they're scrambling, searching for reasons, asking themselves how it happened, how you happened, how something they dismissed could become something they can't ignore. And here's the truth they struggle to face. You were never small. They were just blind. You were never weak. They just couldn't measure your kind of strength. You were never nothing. They just didn't have the range to see what was forming. Now they do. Now they feel it. Now they're living inside the shockwave of your becoming. The same voice that said you'd never be anything can barely speak now, because every breath you take is proof they were wrong, and every step you take is a reminder. You didn't become something in spite of their doubt. You became something because of it. They only paid attention to the noise. That was their mistake. They watched for fall apart, not construction. They looked for gossip, not growth. They waited for signs of failure, not seeds of evolution. They thought you disappeared because you were done, not because you were becoming. See, they never learned how transformation really works. They think the rise is loud. They think power announces itself. They think success is something they can see coming from miles away. But real change, real greatness, real destiny, it grows in silence, it evolves in shadow, it matures out of sight. You didn't scream your progress. You lived it. You didn't argue with their doubt. You outgrew it. You didn't try to convince them. You let time do the talking. And now that time is here, and they have nothing to defend themselves with. No excuses, no explanations, no stories that make sense anymore, because the version of you they doubted is gone. You replaced it with something they never imagined, a version of you that has power in its voice, steel in its presence, inner power in its eyes. They used to call you unreasonable. Now they call you unstoppable. They used to call you unrealistic. Now they call you the exception. Because your impossible didn't just happen. It rewrote the rules they tried to use against you. The future they said you'd never reach. You live inside it now. The doors they said were locked. You built your own entrance. The potential they refused to see. It became too bright to deny. And don't misunderstand this. They remember exactly what they said. They remember the tone. They remember the smirk. They remember who they were when they believed you'd never rise. But now they can't say it out loud anymore. Because you exist. Because you made it. Because you became the proof they swore would never exist. That's the paradox they struggle to face. They tried to define you. You redefined reality instead. And now every time they see you, and they do, they remember the version of themselves that doubted you. They remember that they were small. They remember that they were wrong. They remember that they underestimated a force built for much more than their opinion. Your existence is their correction. Your evolution is their consequence. Your power is their awakening. You didn't just rise. You forced the world to rewrite everything it thought it knew about you. And now your very presence is the punchline to every doubt they ever spoke. There comes a moment, a quiet, irreversible moment, where the world finally sees you. Not the version they assumed, not the version they mocked, not the version they tried to shrink into something manageable. No, they see you. The real one. The one who was forming beneath every insult, every dismissal, every moment they swore you'd never be more than a footnote. That moment has arrived, and it's uncomfortable for them. Because now you are standing in the center of a truth they never prepared for. You didn't need their belief to become legendary. They told you you were dreaming too big. They said you were trying too hard. They laughed when you imagined a life that didn't fit their logic. But funny thing, nobody's laughing now. The same voices that said you'll never make it are suddenly quiet. The same eyes that rolled at your ambition can't look away. The same people who swore you'd stay in place are now frozen, watching what they said was impossible unfold right in front of them. That's the thing about doubt. It's loud when it thinks it's winning, but when the truth exposes it, it goes silent. It hides. It becomes a ghost, terrified of being seen. They thought they were being realistic. They called it logic. They called it protecting you from disappointment. But the real disappointment was this: they never believed in what was already inside you. They couldn't see your inner power. They couldn't feel your hunger. They couldn't sense the force building behind your quiet grind. They thought they were commenting on your limits, but they were really confessing their own. Because people who believe in themselves don't fear your potential. People who dream don't mock dreamers. People who grow don't sit around doubting growth. It was never about you being too much. It was about them being afraid they were too little. They told you you'd never be anything. But what they meant was, I'm scared you'll become something I never had the courage to be. And now that you have, they're confronted with a truth far more brutal than being wrong. They gave up on themselves, and you didn't. That's why your success stings. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved what was always possible. You showed them what belief looks like in motion. You showed them what resilience becomes when it refuses to fall apart. You showed them what impossible turns into when it's challenged by someone who refuses to obey gravity. Now your existence is a lesson, a warning, a mirror. And every time they think of you, they remember the moment. Doubt lost its power. Here's the part they never saw coming. Your success didn't just make you undeniable, it made them visible. Because now everyone can see it. The way they doubted you. The way they rushed to underestimate you. The way they spoke like they knew the ending to a story that hadn't even begun. And now that the plot flipped, they're exposed. They thought they'd be standing over your ruins. Instead, they're standing in the shadow of your ascent. They thought time would prove them right. But time chose a side, and it wasn't theirs. That's the thing about doubt. It ages badly. It doesn't mature. It curdles. It sits in the air when truth shows up. And now here you are, not just alive, not just surviving, not just moving forward, but becoming the blueprint no one believed could exist. You didn't climb by being accepted. You climbed by refusing to disappear. You didn't rise because they believed in you. You rose because you believed in you. And what's hitting them hardest is this. You didn't need saving. You needed time. You didn't need applause. You needed focus. You didn't need permission. You needed isolation. Every "you'll never be anything" was actually an investment in your evolution. They were building you without realizing it. The doubt became discipline. The insults became ignition. The laughter became leverage. The rejection became refinement. You turned every no into a vow. Every closed door into a blueprint. Every moment they counted you out into a reason to become undeniable. And now, they're standing at the edge of something they can't stop. Your momentum, your power, your presence. It's bigger than their opinions, bigger than their predictions, bigger than the limits they tried to place around you. They thought you were a moment. Turns out, you were an era. They thought they were doubting a person. Turns out, they were doubting a force. And now they're living inside the aftermath of that mistake, watching your impossible become reality. While their certainty becomes a punchline, there's a silence that hits the room when the truth finally arrives. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the kind that makes everyone rethink everything. That's the silence surrounding your name right now, because it finally sunk in. You weren't slow. They were blind. You weren't lost. You were building. You weren't behind. You were becoming. They thought the struggle meant failure, but the struggle was the process. The pressure was the training. The doubt was the sharpening. You weren't supposed to be easy to understand. You were meant to be studied, decoded, unlearned and relearned. You were never meant to fit the category. You were meant to rewrite the definition. They said, "You'll never be anything." But tell me this. How can someone who refuses to quit end up with nothing? Not when every setback was fuel. Not when every delay was designed. Not when every silence was strategy. You weren't waiting for permission. You were waiting for alignment. And now that it's here, everything they thought was impossible is starting to look inevitable. They're not just shocked that you made it. They're shocked that you made it without them. No cosign, no shortcut, just scars. Lessons and quiet fire. You didn't need validation. You needed vision. You didn't need applause. You needed discipline. You didn't need support. You needed belief. And now the same people who said, "Stop dreaming. Grow up. Be realistic," are watching you shift reality itself. That's what makes it sting. Not just that they were wrong, but that they never even saw the horizon you were walking toward. They thought you were done, but you were just done listening to them. And now your name is echoing in places they never imagined you'd enter. Your presence is being discussed by people they once worshipped. Your work is being respected by minds they assumed were out of reach. All because you refused to let their small vision shrink your future. That's the punchline they never expected. You didn't just prove them wrong, you made impossible look small. You made never look foolish. You made nothing look like the beginning of everything. And now the world is watching what comes next, while they're stuck replaying the moment they underestimated you. They're still trying to figure out when it happened. When did the person they shrugged off turn into the person they now fear being compared to? Some say it was the day you went quiet. Others say it was the day you stopped explaining. But the truth, it was the day you stopped needing them at all. You see, they thought success was loud, flashy, announced in advance. But your rise, it was silent, internal, almost invisible, until it became undeniable. That's the kind of transformation that shakes people, because they can't track it, they can't measure it, and they definitely can't stop it. You grew in places they never looked. You built skills they never valued. You developed a mindset they never respected. And now, the same people who claimed you were nothing special are whispering your name like it's a warning. Because the truth they never wanted to face is standing right in front of them. You were never trying to fit in. You were studying the whole system. You weren't chasing attention. You were building alignment. You weren't trying to win their approval. You were preparing for a future only you could see. And now, the future is here. And suddenly everyone's acting shocked, acting confused, acting like it wasn't obvious. But here's the part they'll never admit. They did see it. They just didn't believe it. They saw the intensity, the quiet ambition, the relentless patience. They saw the way you paid attention to things they ignored, like self-control, emotional intelligence, long-term focus. They saw your eyes change when you talked about your purpose, but they told themselves it didn't matter. And now they're forced to watch what happens when someone refuses to fold, just because the world said they should. You didn't skip steps. You didn't cheat the process. You didn't get lucky. You stayed in the shadows until you could cast your own light. Now they're scrambling for explanations. Who helped them? Where did they come from? How did this happen? They still can't comprehend that the most powerful person in the room is the one who spent years being dismissed. They tried to bury you, but they never checked what kind of soil you were planted in. They tried to replace you, but they never understood what made you rare. They tried to define you, but they never learned your language. Now they're face to face with a reality they helped create. The one they dismissed is the one they can't outrun. Their doubt didn't stop you. It sharpened you. Their silence didn't erase you. It protected you. Their disbelief didn't weaken you. It freed you. And now every room you enter carries the same tension. This one is different. This one saw the truth before it arrived. This one turned never into destiny. They told you you'd never be anything. Congratulations. You just became the reminder that their imagination was too small. They don't say it out loud, but you can feel it now. The shift in how they look at you, the hesitation, the second guessing, the uneasy respect that wasn't there before. They used to speak to you like they were above you. Now they speak like they're trying not to reveal their insecurity. That's what happens when someone outgrows the box they were placed in. Not by shouting, not by begging, not by proving anything, but by becoming someone too undeniable to ignore. They told you you'd never amount to anything. Remember, they said it casually. They said it confidently. They said it like they were reading a fact from a file. But now those same voices are rewriting history. I always knew they had something. I could tell from the start. I supported them the whole time. Funny how the world rearranges its memory when faced with someone it misjudged. You didn't change for them? You changed in spite of them. And now they're learning a lesson the hard way. Doubt is a dangerous currency, not because it stops those who are doubted, but because it fuels them. They thought their words would break you. Instead, those words became bricks, and you built something with them, something solid, something lasting, something real. They still don't understand how you did it, because they were tracking fame while you were tracking mastery. They were watching followers while you were studying patterns. They were waiting for validation while you were breaking your own limits. You didn't become powerful because they underestimated you. You became powerful because you outgrew their permission. That's the part they'll never forgive. Not the success, not the growth, not the evolution, but the fact that you didn't need them to make it real. Let that sink in. You walked through a world that tried to forget you. Now it has to remember you forever. Your story is the thing they fear most. The quiet one, the patient one, the written off one, who rewrote everything. They wanted you ordinary. You became impossible. They wanted you forgettable. You became the example. They wanted you small. You became undeniable. Now the same people who once said, "You'll never be anyone," are adjusting their tone when they speak your name. They don't call it jealousy. They call it curiosity. They call it surprise. But you can hear the truth inside the silence. They never thought you'd survive. They definitely never thought you'd rise. And now, they're forced to face the one outcome they never prepared for. You didn't just become something. You became the thing they never saw coming. The reality check they can't avoid. The proof that never is just a word people use when they can't imagine the size of your becoming. And here's the poetic part. When they look at you now, they aren't just seeing who you are. They're seeing every moment they should have paid attention. Every moment they could have supported you. Every moment they missed their chance. And in the quiet spaces of their minds, they finally understand. You weren't failing. You were forming. And now the world has to live with the result. Say it softly. Say it with peace. Say it like a prophecy fulfilled. They told me I'd never be anything. Look at me now. There's a moment in every legend's life where the world quietly realizes it was wrong about them. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. No applause. No spotlight. Just a shift. Sudden. Undeniable. Irreversible. A moment where the whispers change. Where the questions turn into conclusions. Where the skepticism collapses under its own weight. You just crossed that moment. And now the ones who swore you'd never become anything are trying to figure out how you became everything without their approval, without their permission, without their blueprint. That's what they don't understand. You didn't climb their ladder. You built a door they never notice. You didn't beg for an invitation. You walked in like you already belonged. You didn't play their game. You rewrote the rules and stayed calm while they panicked. And now, they're studying you like a glitch, a pattern breaker, a living exception. They're scrolling through old memories, trying to find the moment they missed something, because that's what stings the most. Not your success, but the fact that they couldn't predict it. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't own it. Every person who doubted you is now stuck with one quiet realization. They underestimated someone who was never running their race. That's why you were never losing. You were building, quietly, steadily, patiently. And they can't handle patience. They wanted your collapse on a schedule. They wanted your failure on cue. But you gave them silence, and growth, and transformation they couldn't measure. You didn't turn into what they expected. You turned into what they feared. Someone who doesn't fold under pressure, but becomes pressure. Someone who doesn't need applause to know their worth. Someone who doesn't chase validation because they carry truth. And the truth is this: their doubt was never a prophecy. It was only proof of their limits, not yours. Every time they said you won't make it, they were really saying, we can't imagine it. But imagination is not required for destiny. Destiny doesn't need their faith. Destiny doesn't need their permission. Destiny doesn't wait for them to believe. It keeps moving. And it chose you. That's the part they can't file away or erase. You survived being overlooked. You survived being dismissed. You survived being counted out. And now you're forcing the world to recalculate everything. They're watching you rise and pretending it doesn't bother them. But it does. They feel it in their pride. They hear it in their minds. They taste it in the silence. Because now the world sees what they refused to see. Now the world hears what they tried to silence. Now the world is witnessing what they swore would never happen. And they don't have a script for this part. They don't have a plan for this outcome. They spent so long betting against you, they never learned how to face you. And now, they have to. Quietly, respectfully, reluctantly. Because the impossible they mocked is standing right in front of them. Breathing, rising, unbothered. Say it again, not for them, for you. Everything they said I'd never be, I became.